Amelia, Justine. Hello to everybody joining as we get going with this webinar. As usual, thank you to everybody for your attendance and thank you for your punctuality. This is the next installment in our 21st Century Skills webinar series. And we are talking a little bit about self-compassion today. And this is something that I have touched on at various points in the other workshops that we've done. You know, we've done workshops on mindfulness and relaxation, and these all have significant overlaps with the topic we're going to speak about today. Talking about self-care as well. Self-compassion overlaps with a lot of those, but it really is such an important tool that it is worth having its own webinar. And as always, with all of these topics, it's something we could probably spend the whole week talking about, but we have to distill it down to its essential qualities so we can talk about it a little bit this afternoon in an hour. Hi, Ernest, Emilian, and Alexander. Hi, Bukana. Hi, welcome, everybody. I hope that the weather is good where you are. I hope that you're all having a good short week. Bad news is next week is a 5-day week. Can you imagine having to have a 5-day week? That'll be next week, but I think the following week might be a short one. So good news. So we will have some time for Q&A at the end of this, basically just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here, speak a little bit about self-compassion, to give you a bit of an idea about what it is. At this point, it might be helpful just to get some feedback from you guys. What do you think of when you hear the term self-compassion? You can just put it in the chat. What do you think of? What's the first word or first phrase that comes to your mind when you think of self-compassion? So in this webinar, we're going to be speaking just a little bit about that, unpacking exactly what it is, talking a little bit about the differences between self-compassion and self-esteem. These are similar concepts, but they're quite different, as you'll see. We're going to speak a little bit about the difference between self-compassion and self-pity, and we will finish with a guided self-compassion talk, which is about finding your compassionate voice for yourself. So we'll finish the session with that. It's quite similar to some of the exercises we did together in the mindfulness and the relaxation webinars. So that'll be the end, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So what are you guys thinking when you're thinking about this term, self-compassion? You can put it in the chat. I just want to get a sense of where you are on that. As always, I'm going to try and monitor the chat as we go through. There's a good amount of people in this webinar already, so I won't be able to respond to everyone all the time, but if I see some relevant coming up, I'm going to keep a look on that and try to respond. Again, there will be some Q&A as well. If you have any administrative questions as well, the chat is being monitored by Israel at Regent, and he'll be able to just assist you with any questions you might have as well. Sylvie, you're saying self-compassion is about being kind to yourself. Absolutely. Noble, you have a long thing there, long explanation, which is your practice of treating oneself with kindness, understanding, acceptance. Yeah, absolutely. That's all very good. Feeling for yourself, mindfulness, Victor, absolutely. Sharon, you're saying self-love, correct. Chanel, you agree with that. And then Chris, sympathy. Willibanzi, appreciating and loving yourself. Absolutely. Okay. Letitia, having compassion for oneself, having empathy for oneself. Yes, I think you guys are very much on the right track. It seems like it is a self-explanatory concept, but let's spend some time getting into it. So essentially, if we think about the topic of this construct of compassion, so getting about self-compassion, if we're just speaking about compassion, what does it mean to feel compassion for other people? It's quite a warm word. It's a word that signifies some type of connection and positivity. What does it actually mean? So if we're feeling compassion towards other people and towards our fellow humans, what that means, we wish well for them, we want the best for them, we want them to be healthy and happy, prosperous, thriving, wishing well for other people. It's being sensitive to the emotional aspects of when other people are suffering. So what is their emotional experience like, and being sensitive to that, having some type of awareness of what it is like to be experiencing an emotional reaction in times of adversity. And as a lot of you have indicated already, it's about kindness and it's about understanding towards other people. So being kind and understanding to other people, that's compassion. When we look at self-compassion, it really is an extension of these constructs towards ourselves. So it's wishing well for ourselves, taking that same feeling of loving kindness towards other people and wanting the best for them, and directing that towards ourselves. The ability to wish well on ourselves, wanting the best for ourselves, wanting to be happy, wanting ourselves to be well. It's being sensitive to our own emotional aspects of our own suffering. And then it's obviously, as you guys have said, it's about kindness and understanding towards ourselves. Okay, and I see as the comments come in, you guys are just adding to that. You're absolutely right. Agree with all of that. Maila's talking about self-belief as well. That's a really interesting one. We're going to speak a little bit about how self-belief comes into it. Yeah, thank you for your comments. Keep them coming as we go. So you see there that self-compassion is this capacity to direct the well wishes and the wanting the best for other people, treating other people with kindness and understanding, and being able to redirect that towards ourselves as well. And the thing about compassion is it's not a limited resource. So it's not to say if we're putting compassion towards ourselves, we have less for other people. In fact, it actually tends to work the other way. The compassion tends to snowball. The capacity to be compassionate towards ourselves actually helps us be more compassionate towards other people. There is such a thing as compassion fatigue, which is someone, for example, in my line of work, sometimes happens. It's a type of burnout that people who are in the business of being empathetic and connecting with other people's emotional experience, especially during times of hardship, they can start to feel that it becomes harder and harder to feel that compassion. The ability to be compassionate towards ourselves and create spaces for ourselves where we can feel and be well, that then regenerates our capacity to actually be compassionate towards other people. So it's the type of thing that feeds snowball. Okay, so we're going to speak a little bit about self-esteem, just to, as I said, try to get a bit of a sense for the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion. These are adjacent terms, but they're not the same, as I hope you'll see as we go through this. So just to speak a little bit about self-esteem, hopefully we'll give you a sense of what that is and then how it differs from self-compassion. Okay, so self-esteem is an exceptionally important aspect of mental health, and one of the most important clinical markers. And what this means is that almost every clinical disorder in some way is linked to an absence of self-esteem. It is linked to feelings of inadequacy and feelings of not being enough, feelings of self-doubt, despair. And it's so closely linked to things like depression, anxiety, and other mood disorders, other anxiety disorders, and also the more extreme types of clinical disorders such as personality disorders. We also very, very often find that there is self-esteem as part of that. This has been really well established over time in the clinical literature. It's a really important part of it. And if you had asked me a couple of years ago, what do I think the most important aspect of our psychology is, I would have definitely said self-esteem, and in terms of mental health and wellness as well. I still believe that, but my views on that have evolved a little bit. And this webinar hopefully will take you through that and explain to you a little bit why. And it's not for a moment that I think it's not important, but there are other ways of thinking about how we think about ourselves. So self-esteem not only is linked to mental ill health, it is also correlated with happiness and emotional wellness. So people who are happier tend to have higher self-esteems. People who are thriving emotionally and able to experience wellness, they tend to have higher self-esteem as well. And these start to become, I suppose, chicken and egg situations. It becomes hard always to identify what comes first. With disorders, like depression, for example, is it the depression that's leading to feelings of self-doubt and inadequacy? Or is it the fact that we feel inadequate and we feel self-doubt that leads to the depression? What comes first? Likewise with happiness, is it because we are feeling good about ourselves that we tend to be happier, or is it because we're happier that we tend to feel better about ourselves? It's hard to actually describe a causal relation between these two. But what we can definitely say is there's a correlation. So as happiness increases, self-esteem increases. As happiness decreases, self-esteem decreases. That's a fairly robust relationship there. And that's really interesting. Yeah, some good definitions of self-esteem coming through as well. How we esteem ourselves, how we value ourselves, how we perceive ourselves. Reading your comments there, very spot on. And confidence as well, yeah. So it's an adaptive societal function to have a low self-worth. What that means is that if everyone had a really high sense of their own value, you might find that there would be more conflict, and societies wouldn't function as well. So if you think about for most of our history and most of our evolution history when our brains were being developed over tens, hundreds of thousands of years, we were in very small groups. So I don't want to get this wrong, but you can imagine anything between 40 and 100 people in these hunter-gatherer groups that were in very small groups, and that was it. If we ever saw another tribe or another group, our main priority was to destroy them. We weren't having these kind of intertribal catch-ups. So the people that we were with were very low, and as a result, people had to. The number of people we were with were very low. So as a result, people had to find ways of coexisting and adapting in these quite small societal groups. And if everyone had this really kind of inflated sense of what they're worth, then there would be a lot of conflict in those situations. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have humility, to be seen as something a little bit different to that. And this is often where we get it wrong, because so much of the cultural pressures that we have and the religious pressures that we have really prioritize us minimizing our own importance and focusing on other people. So don't put yourself first. Sacrifice for other people. You need to always be cognizant of other people as opposed to being arrogant or overconfident. These are really bad looks and things that we often feel a lot of pressure from very early in our life, very young, to avoid. So it's seen as virtuous to not think highly of ourselves and to focus on other people. There's of course some societal functions to that. It works quite well if we're not thinking too well of ourselves or too highly of ourselves. But the challenge is when does humility, which is not exaggerating my own importance and just narcissistically demanding that I'm given attention or demanding all the oxygen in the room, when does humility become something a bit more pathological, like a low self-esteem, like an unrealistic negative view towards myself? This is an interesting question to explore. So it's linked to confidence. I know in the comments there, so we mentioned confidence. We often think about confidence and self-esteem as interchangeable, as though they're the same thing. They're slightly different, and what that means is it's possible to be very confident in something and not have a high self-esteem. So, people can fake it. People can kind of look confident, but not really be confident. Or they might be very confident in a certain aspect of their life, but still have very negative views about themselves and others. And confidence is very much it's a kind of skill-based attitude. So it's rational to feel confident if we have competency. So competence leads to confidence. If I have had a career of playing soccer and I'm really good at it, it would be reasonable for me to feel confident going out there and playing a game. If I haven't kicked a ball in 15 years, it would be irrational for me to have confidence that I'm going to go out there and actually be able to compete at a high level. So that doesn't say anything about my self-esteem. It just talks about my ability to gauge my own competence in a certain realm. Flying an airplane, for example, I could have a very good sense of my own worth and not have too much self-judgment. But at the same time, if I feel like I'm the most confident, or if I feel confident of being able to fly a plane without having any training as a pilot, that would be irrational. So they're different things. And often the reason we confuse them is because a person with a higher sense of self-esteem is much more likely to be confident because they're not going to have all that noise and they're not going to need as much approval and acceptance from other people. So that's going to come across as confidence. And people who have a very low sense of their self-worth and really need approval and really really fear judgment from other people, they're more likely to have lower confidence, but they're not the same thing. So these are the ins and outs of self-esteem. However, and this is what is increasingly becoming clear in modern psychology and modern research on this, is that there are some drawbacks to this concept of self-esteem. So firstly, it's a stubborn variable. It's quite tractable. And what that means is it doesn't change very easily. Self-esteem typically, like anything in our psychology, there's often a genetic aspect to it, which means it's inherited through our genes. But a lot of the time, it's really an environmental trait. We learn through the world what we are worth. And often that's an irrational lesson. It's not necessarily a lesson that's based in fact. But if we get a lot of neglect, for example, if we're emotionally neglected, if we are overlooked, if our needs aren't taken care of, if we're abused, if we experience significant ongoing trauma or witness abuse, what that means is that the lesson we're learning is that we're not very important. Bad things happen to us. Child is egocentric, so they kind of see themselves as the reason for these things. And so we start to develop a negative sense of our own value based on the feedback we're getting from the world. And that can be quite stubborn. It's quite hard to change that. If we grow up thinking there's something about me that's just not quite enough, because the people who are meant to care for me weren't able to give me what they were able to give me. And that is a very, very common story, of course, in most people's childhood, is that our parents are not able to be the perfect parents. And there's a whole continuum of how bad and how unavailable they can be. But very few people get to adulthood feeling this complete sense of I'm enough. Those are the exceptions to the rule. So if you grow up feeling I'm not enough, it's quite hard through therapy and over time even to change it. It's possible, but it tends to be quite a stubborn variable. So not always even the most helpful to focus on. It's also comparative and evaluative in nature. So if you're thinking about self-esteem, and again, we look at the descriptions that you guys are giving them, how you see yourself, how we value ourselves. There's a significant value judgment being put on it. So what am I worth? There's almost like a number to it. What price do I put on myself? And how do we figure that out? We have to evaluate us. What do I do well? What is my contribution? What do I add to other people? What do I add to the world? What would it be like if I'm not here? We ask ourselves all of these questions, and it's very evaluative. It's very judgmental. Even if it's positive self-esteem, we're still judging ourselves. And if it's about value, it's often also comparative. So I have to kind of think about myself in accordance to other people and other people's competence and value. And that can be quite problematic as well. What they've found over the last 40 years or so is that there has been the self-esteem movement for the reasons that are above. Self-esteem is such an important thing. So it's much better to have a higher self-esteem than lower self-esteem, of course. But because it's been identified as such an important thing fairly recently, in the last 50 years, what we've found in the last 30, 40 years is that there's been this significant focus on having a high self-esteem in children. And with the best of intentions, what this means is that the children that are grown out of this often have quite narcissistic traits. And what narcissistic traits mean is they have an overinflated sense of their own importance, which is often a defense against some deeper insecurities, but they tend to kind of overemphasize their own importance. And that, of course, can be problematic as well. You kind of see this with the millennial culture, an aspect of that is probably linked in some of these dynamics. Okay. So if you think about self-esteem, you're thinking about valuing ourselves, you're thinking about our thoughts, our beliefs, our opinions about ourselves, you're thinking about an assessment of what we're worth. Self-compassion, on the other hand, is not about the evaluative, judgmental, analytical assessment of ourselves. It's more about the relationship we have with ourselves. So it's how we treat ourselves, not how we value ourselves. How do we treat ourselves? How kind or unkind are we to ourselves? It's the quality of the relationship that we have with ourselves. And this is always a very important or a very helpful hack, if you will, that you can do, is you can you can get perspective on your relationship with yourself by imagining you were another person. I hope that doesn't sound like too much of a crazy making experience, but we often don't have good visibility on our relationship with ourselves because it's our norm. So the way we treat ourselves doesn't even feel like it's a thing. It just is what it is, right? And if we're really judgmental or really unkind, we're often not even aware of that. We really hard on ourselves, we have very high unrealistic expectations of ourselves. We're often not even aware that that's what we're doing. And even if we are aware, we kind of think, well, it's appropriate. This is important. I need to do this. How would I be better if I didn't do this? When we take that and we think, well, if I was another person, would I expect the same? Would I treat myself in the same way? Would I say what I'm saying to myself right now to another person? And that can give us some visibility and perspective on our own relationship with ourselves. And we can start to see there how the quality of the relationship we have with ourselves might actually be quite of a low quality. So it's not a value judgment. It's not saying what am I worth? It's an attitude or a mindset towards ourselves. How do I think about myself, especially when I'm going through difficult times? How do I treat myself? How do I respond to mistakes that I make and my imperfections that are a very normal part of being? Just to sum up the difference, then I hope this is making sense. This idea between self-acceptance, passion, and this idea of self-esteem. Self-esteem is self-evaluation. Self-acceptance is relationship based. Self-esteem is very much comparisons. It's about circumstances. How well do I do in the situation? And as a result, self-esteem can be more fragile because all it takes is a negative experience or perhaps failure or ongoing failure, negative feedback from people or judgment from people. And then we can start to feel that can be quite precarious. We can start to think, well, maybe I'm not worth very much. And there's something very conditional about that, right? Do I only treat myself well when I feel like I'm worth it? That doesn't feel right. If I were to treat another person like that, we would want to kind of make the most important relationships in our lives be fairly unconditional. Every relationship has conditions on it, but we don't have the sense that we're saying, okay, well, I'm only treating you well because I feel like you deserve it. If you stop deserving it, you start letting me down, well, then I'm going to treat you badly. That seems like the foundations for quite an unhealthy relationship, and the same with ourselves. So self-esteem can have mixed effects on well-being, as discussed. Can be really, really good, can have some drawbacks, and can be quite hard to move as well. Whereas self-acceptance and self-compassion has very, very positive effects on our well-being. It's very well established by now. So there are three aspects to self-compassion that you can think of, and this is based on Dr. Kristin Neff's work. She's the probably the most influential person in taking self-compassion from its roots, which is this Buddhist concept that's been around for thousands of years, into modern discourse, into modern psychology as well. It's rarely used a lot in modern psychological clinical practice. She's done amazing work in taking it from there and really kind of testing the robustness and scientific validity of it, which is very, very much there. She's got a couple of books on this, a couple of TED talks. If you're interested in it, you can look further into it. Her name is Kristin Neff. That's very much recommended. But this is based on her work, and she kind of breaks it down into these three aspects. And they overlap. They're connected in some ways, but also they're slightly they stand alone in their own way, but then they feed back into each other. So of course, self-kindness, that's the first thing that most people would think of when you think of self-compassion. We think of compassion, we think of kindness, we think of ourselves. Common humanity, that's something a little bit different in mindfulness. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time unpacking those before we go on to the actual practical self-compassion voice finding technique. So firstly, self-kindness. It sounds like a simple concept, but it is very much under-practiced, I can assure you. I think most people will probably agree that it's a good idea. I think most people struggle to actually do it in practice, and that should give us pause, right? We should ask ourselves, okay, well, what's going on, and why do we find it hard to be kind towards ourselves, and attitudes of kindness? So it's about understanding as well. That's a big key. Understanding is about making the efforts to put ourselves towards another person. It's the efforts to understand what it's like to be that person, and not just rush to judge. Often we do this. We just think, why did this person do that? Why did they just say this really, really mean thing to me? They're such a mean person. The act of kindness, understanding, is saying, okay, well, they're actually not normally that mean. this was really mean. What made them say that? What could be going on in their lives? What could I have said perhaps that made them feel so defensive? And I'm not taking responsibility for their behavior, but I assume that they're generally a kind person. This was out of character. There must be something going on there. Let me inquire. Let me try and make an effort to understand. And it's the same thing with ourselves. To not rush to judgment to ourselves, but to understand. Yeah, I am going through a difficult time right now. Well, life has been hard to me, or I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. And yeah, it wasn't my best interaction, but there are good reasons for it. And again, this is not an argument against taking responsibility, but with self-kindness, we're actually able to take more responsibility for our behavior. When we are harder on ourselves, we often end up blaming. We just blame ourselves, we blame other people. Blame is an absence of responsibility. It's unwillingness to take accountability for our actions. Kindness allows us to really stand up and own it, because we know, well, we're not going to be judged for it. But we are going to expect better. We are going to have some standards for ourselves, and then say, okay, well, I did this. It's not really what the standards that I have for myself. I know why I did it. I know that I'm a human being, and I'm allowed to try it differently in the future. That's what understanding looks like. So again, it's about suspending judgments. These are the things that we spoke about in the mindfulness webinar as well. And what that means is that we just accept things for what they are. We accept ourselves without you should have done this. Why did you do that? That was terrible. That was bad. Or that was good. Those are all judgments. Often they come already critical. They come in a critical way as well. And then warmth. Again, at the beginning, I spoke about this idea of compassion, and by extension, self-compassion being this kind of warm feeling of connection. And hopefully we'll get into that a bit when we do the technique just now. And also patience, to be patient towards ourselves and not to have expectations that are unrealistic. It's a really helpful concept of this idea of niceness versus kindness. And often we get so caught up, again, because it's highly valued socially, on this idea of niceness. We need to be nice to everybody. People need to think we're a nice person. But niceness is very surface area, very kind of surface based, very superficial. So what that means is, I could be really nice to you, and then I could go and absolutely trash you behind your back. How do I look? Well, I look fine. You don't know what I'm saying about you. I look nice, but it's actually not very kind. Changing these around and prioritizing kindness to niceness is one of the best things we can do for our own truth, but also for our relationship as well, because kindness allows us to be honest. Niceness doesn't allow us to be honest. If we're always trying to be nice, we can never actually say what's really on our mind, and it's such an important point in our relationships to be able to have a voice that's honest. But we can do that through kindness. Kindness allows us to be honest. It allows us to speak our truth. But it allows us to also take into consideration the people and take into consideration ourselves and our needs. So this is something I'd really encourage you guys to think about. How much effort are you putting into trying to be nice? And would that effort be better spent on investing in kindness? And how freeing might that be? How many different types of interactions might be available to you, and how many different types of boundaries could you set, perhaps that are needing to be set, that you could do without the fear of being a bad person? To do them by being kind. I think we agree that a kind person is not what we think of as a bad person. So just a few comments there. Audrey speaking about how it's hard to avoid being judgmental. That's so true. It really is something that comes so naturally. We're always judging things, and we're always judging people, and we're always judging ourselves. And there's reasons that we do that, of course, but it comes at a price. It comes at this constant price, and the practice of suspending judgment can be so helpful. We can be discerning, we can have opinions, but at the same time, to be able to stand back and say, actually, I don't need the security or the sense of security or false security that judgment brings me. I can just accept. I can just accept people. I can accept myself. There's something also very freeing in that as well. Common humanity is the second aspect of self-compassion, and you can see how this is important through a number of questions. So, how do you see your own humanity? do you feel that there are different rules for you? Do you feel like you are expected to behave, or you expect yourself to behave in a way that you wouldn't expect anyone else to behave? What is it that you deserve? Do you deserve different things to other people? Do you deserve less than other people? What do other people deserve? Do they deserve to be well and to be happy, to be loved? Do you deserve the same things? And what are your expectations again of yourself and of other people? This is so fundamental as well, because often we have this different set of expectations and rules for ourselves that we don't have for other people. And common humanity is starting to lean into the fact that actually we are just part of the great human experience that's out there, and that can be humbling, but it can also be deep connected, which is a very basic human need to feel connected to people. And what suffering does is it disconnects us from people. If I'm suffering and going through a hard time, I can be the loneliest experiences because it's hard to feel like anyone else is going through this. Common humanity sees my suffering as part of the great human experience, and knowing there are many people who are experiencing the same as me. This is not Schadenfreude. It's a German word for taking delight in the suffering of other people. That is the thing that people do. This is not the same as that. This is just saying, I don't have to feel so alone because there are other people going through what I'm going through. There are other people suffering in the way that I am. And it's not weakness. It's not fragility. This is me being a human being, and I deserve the same as other people deserve when they're suffering, such as kindness, such as a space to feel what I need to feel. So common humanity opens the door for us to be kinder towards ourselves, because we start to apply the rules that we have theoretically for other people and people generally. We can then start to create some space for applying those to ourselves. And then mindfulness, I know we had a full webinar on this, so I won't spend too long on this. Just to remind you, it's about emotional regulation. It's about being conscious of our own experience. It's about being attentive and curious of our own experience and what it's like to be in the world in this present moment. If you missed the webinar on this, you better find it on the YouTube channel, the Regent YouTube channel, I believe. Have a look into it, but we did a few mindfulness techniques as well. So it's an acknowledgement versus a reaction. A reaction is something happens and we feel a certain way and we just react to that. And we feel like we need to manage it, or we feel like we need to think a certain way about it. Mindfulness is just acknowledgement and acceptance of the way that things are, acceptance of reality. And then understanding this continuum that emotional regulation runs on. And there is an emotional regulation webinar coming up next week, actually. And we'll spend a lot of time on this, but just understanding that we can either over obsess with our feelings, we can deny our feelings. And in the middle, there's some form of healthy emotional regulation. It's not avoidance and denial and pretending that we're not feeling something. It's also not feeling so much self-pity that we get lost in it. It's just to be able to acknowledge, to accept, to be present with it. And this is such a key point as well. The reason we often shy away from self-compassion is that it feels like self-pity. And there's something that we kind of recoil from there, that feel that, I don't want to feel sorry for myself. And that's not what self-compassion is. So if we're feeling pity for someone else, it's often it's a negative perspective. Even a perspective of superiority. I hate to be in that person's situation. They're really, terrible. That sounds awful. It's just minimizing the experience, and it kind of comes with this idea of weakness. This person, they're so small and they're so weak that I pity them. I wouldn't want to be there. Whereas compassion is just about understanding. It's about saying, yeah, imagine how hard that must be. I can see that. I can see your suffering. I acknowledge it. And that's the same towards ourselves. We don't have to feel those feelings of victimhood and self-pity. This why me? Why is this happening to me? But rather we can just say, again, part of the common humanity, why shouldn't it happen to me? These things happen to people all the time, as much as they're painful and it feels unfair. There's still a space for being kind and understanding towards myself whilst I'm going through times of adversity. So one of the concepts I came across recently, actually in preparation for this webinar a few weeks ago, is this idea of self-compassion being a practice of goodwill, not good feelings. That's really important. It means we get to feel difficult feelings. We don't have to feel the good feelings all the time. In fact, if we only focus on feeling the good feelings, what that means, we are denying the uncomfortable feelings. And if we deny the uncomfortable feelings, what that actually does, and more often than not, is it robs us of the capacity to feel the good feelings as well. So acknowledging our full range of emotional experience that we have is so important. And that means we can have this goodwill towards ourselves and this openness towards our experience, towards our emotions, even if they're difficult feelings. But it doesn't have to be that they're just these kind of feel good feelings all the time. That's unrealistic. Okay, so I'm going to go into a mindfulness guided meditation fairly briefly with you guys now. These are similar, as I said, to the ones we did in some of the previous webinars, but this is focusing really on taking the act of compassion towards other people and leaning into that, and then being able to transfer some of that towards ourselves. So it's this idea of loving kindness, which is again this Buddhist concept, and being able to feel that loving kindness towards others, but also being able to feel it towards ourselves, and finding that passionate voice, finding that self-compassion we always return to. Okay. So yeah, find yourself in a comfortable position. You can be sitting, you can be lying down. You don't have to lie down, as long as you're comfortable and kind of relaxed, alert. And then, as we've done in previous webinars, if you're joining us for the first time, that's okay. Just start focusing on your breathing a little bit. Just focus on some deep diaphragmatic breaths, deep in your diaphragm. Hold it for a few seconds and out, and just focus on breathing for a few seconds. And I will walk you through this. If you're able to put aside anything that might distract you, you'll get more from this. And try and give this your full attention if you're able to. Okay. So we're just setting aside a little bit of time for this busy day, just to bring a little bit of warmth and goodwill into our lives. Just make sure you're sitting in a comfortable position, upright or relaxed. If you're lying down, that's fine. Just make sure that you're alert enough, not going to fall asleep. You can close your eyes if you want to. You don't have to. Close them fully or partially, or you can just keep them open. Just make sure you're not going to get too distracted. Find yourself getting distracted, just slowly bring your attention back. And just focus on your breathing for a few seconds. Deep breaths in through your nose. Hold it for 3. And out again. Now put your hands over your heart to remind yourself that you're bringing not only attention, but loving attention to your experience. Feel the warmth of your hands, the gentle pressure of your hands. Just feel how your chest rises and falls beneath your hands with every breath. Now think about a person or another living being who normally makes you smile. Could be a child of yours, it might be a grandparent, it might be a cat or a dog. Whoever normally brings natural happiness to your heart. Maybe it's a bird outside your window. Just let yourself feel what it's like to be in that being's presence. Allow yourself to enjoy the good company. Now, recognize how vulnerable this loved one is. Just like you. That means they can get sick, they will age, and eventually they'll die. Just like you, this being wishes to be happy and free from suffering. Just like you and every other living being. So repeat these words softly and gently. Feel the importance of these words. May you be safe. May you be peaceful. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. When you notice that your mind has wandered, as it will do, just return to the words and this image of the loved one that you have in your mind, and these feelings of goodwill towards them, that they will be safe, and they will be peaceful, and they will be healthy, and they will live with ease, and savor any warm feelings that might arise. Now you're going to add yourself to the circle of goodwill. Put your hand over your heart again and feel the warmth and gentle pressure of your hand. Just for a moment or for the rest of this meditation, up to you. And you're opening up the circle now and you're saying, may you and I be safe. May you and I be peaceful. May you and I be healthy. And may you and I live with peace. Visualize your whole body in your mind's eye. Notice any stress or uneasiness that might be lingering within you. And now offer kindness to yourself. May I be safe. May I be peaceful. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. Take a few deep breaths and just rest. Sit quietly in your own body. Savor the goodwill and compassion that's flowing naturally from your own heart. And know that you can return to these phrases anytime that you need. Take a few more deep breaths. And then you can slowly open your eyes again, or you can slowly return your attention to this presentation. Okay, good. As I said, similar to some of the meditations we did with the mindfulness and the relaxation, they already are, they have roots in the same concepts. But the idea here is to access that compassion and that kindness that we have to other people, people that matter to us, being able to direct that to ourselves as well. Sarah, I'm glad it was good. Again, these are things that you can return to, as with all the other exercises we've done. You can return to these whenever you need them. So we have a bit of time, a couple of minutes early, so let's open up a little bit for some comments and some questions. I'm just keeping an eye on the comments here. Thank you, Sylvia, Zetu, Tira, Nicolene, Donnie, and Mukelo. Guys, I'm glad it was powerful. I'm glad you were able to get something from that. Let's talk self-compassion. Any questions, any concerns that you have, anything you would disagree with, anything you would agree with, do let me know whilst we have a few minutes. If you are interested in setting up a counseling session, you're welcome to email me at counseling@regent.ac.za. Those are individual counseling sessions and they are completely confidential. Great, Victor. I'm glad that you're able to work through some of that anxiety and brain fog that happens to all of us. So I'm glad that you were able to focus on that a bit. Sounds really good. Sarah, how can we meditate every morning before work? Well, I mean, you can literally just meditate every morning before work. I guess that's the simple answer. It's a really good idea to do, to have some quiet time to begin our day. think that's such an important building block in living a life that's intentional, and where we're not dealing with the type of brain fog and anxiety that Victor was describing that so many of us feel. Yeah, I think that's great. You can, as I've said in other webinars, you can find these guided meditations on YouTube. You can download apps for them as well. There's some really good ones, and they'll take you through a daily meditation as well. If you see the value in that, definitely follow up on that. Yeah, Warren, there is a recording channel towards the end of the week. Yeah, hectic workplaces do disrupt our peace and ability to be centered and kind to ourselves. So yeah, refocusing meditation. So here, just going back a bit. I think that's the slide you're looking for, Tara, is that right? So the phrases, Osipo, are may I be safe, may I be peaceful, may I be kind to myself, and may I accept myself. Not may I accept myself, sorry, that's another one. May I live a life with ease, I believe it is. I'll find it now. I just moved on to another one actually. May I be safe, may I be peaceful, may I be healthy, and may I live. Great, Simone. I see you. That is magical indeed. I'm so glad you had that. Geralda, the counseling sessions are not just for study-related issues, not at all. They're completely for anything you feel would be helpful to you, whether it's personal challenges or anything else. You're most welcome to that session counseling at Regent. AC.ZA. It's definitely not just academic-related issues. We do have career counseling as well, and we offer both. Counseling at regent.ac.za. Chanel, thank you guys. I'm just reading your comments. Appreciate your messages. Good. I think that's where we are. Just looking at the Q&A. Yeah. Letitia, you're asking for the second slide. Is that the second slide in total? I can go back to you. This was the one, if I'm mistaken. Again, this will be on the website, guys. Okay, good. If there are no more questions, we can leave it there for today. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate your participation. So good to have you guys being able to connect with these topics and to really engage with them. They really are potentially life-changing. So practice them, become better at them. And yeah, we'll be back next week with a webinar on emotional regulation, which is, again, linked to this, but it's a bit more specifically focused just on the complicated idea of emotions. What do we do with them, basically? Yeah, so thank you very much, guys. Have a good rest of your week. Enjoy the short week, and we will be back again in a week's time. This is not a long gap between this one and the next one. Thank you very much. Thanks for your participation.